here, the first thing I'm going to say is, my name is not Bob Dresner, and I am not an expert on finishing. However, I've done a lot of it. I've taught school for a number of years, and as part of the teaching, obviously, you have to teach finishing, and I just have, in general, just like anybody else, you read a lot and learn different techniques. When I started out preparing for this, I was careful to say that I was going to stick with oil finishes, and I still am. I'm going to talk about salad bowl finish, Form Bs, your wipe-on oil type finishes, and that's what I'll be using for a basis. But as I got thinking about it, and I'm getting ready for this, I said, lo and behold, the process that I'm using, the techniques that I'm using are the same for an oil type finish as they are for, as Kenny was mentioning, a lacquer finish. You go through the same basic steps, okay? Now, for me, the finishing process starts way before the piece is all sanded and ready to go. Because I think you really need to consider, before you put that piece of wood on the lathe, how am I going to finish this thing? What's going to be the most effective way to apply that finish and get the end result that I actually want? Now, one of the things you need to consider, for example, is I've got 3 pieces here that have a different sheen to them. This one has more of a matte finish. It's actually, this is a water-based finish, I believe.
Spray on lacquer, yeah. Water-based.
Water-based spray on lacquer, but it's the satin. The finish that I like, I kind of call it halfway in between, because you can take a gloss finish and buff it, and you get a real high sheen piece. I personally prefer a finish that's cut back just a little bit from that. And again, just as a basic point of information, the difference between the glosses has to do with the diffusion of light on that surface. So that's what we're all about, no matter what we're doing here. But the main thing that I was mentioning about consideration of how you're going to finish it is the fact that, for me, the only way that I can get a quality finish on a turned piece, because it's round, irregular in shape, is to do everything on the lathe, 100% of it. For me to take a bowl like this one right here, and if it were raw wood, say, okay, now I'm going to put a finish on it. I don't want to throw up. Because there'd be a lot of hand sanding, I'd have to worry about which way the grain was going, all of that type of thing. To that end, and just as an illustration then, this bowl was turned in 1999, actually by Brian's wife, my oldest daughter. And it's one of her pride and joy pieces. And about a year ago or more, they decided it was time to get a new dog. So they got a puppy. I don't know. He's a mental case. She is a mental case. She did get this bowl on the floor, upside down. And then she just scratched the bejesus out of it, trying to tip it over. So it is riddled with scratches all over the outside. And so, of course, old Dad's job is to put a new finish on it, and all of the pieces that I'm using in the demo tonight are what I call remounts. They're bowls that have been taken off the lathe. I'm going to remount them. And just real quick, like, not really part of what we're about though, but I just take a piece, usually I like 8/4 wood, but I can use 3/4 inch if I have to. put it on there, and I turn a recess that the bowl will just go into. Now this one does, the foot just kind of comes curved in, but that's okay, because I'll just make this recess so that it's curved and the bowl sits firmly right in there. And you'll be amazed, like I have no idea how fast this lathe is going, but that's going to sit in there pretty nicely. Certainly good enough so I can sand, and put a finish on. What I do is I take the bottom of the bowl, and again, I taught her well. She's got a nice ridge around the outside that the bowl sits on and all that stuff. But I just grab this piece of plywood. I just take a piece of plywood and set it on the bench with a piece of paper on it and just slide it back and forth until it's sanded that smooth. I'll put a bead of glue around this bottom rim, set that in there, make sure it's seated nicely, and then, you know, one of those pieces out of the scrap box, that'll sit right in there, and bring your tailstock in and hold it there, and in a half hour that'll be set right in there. So, you know, every once in a while, for me, more than often than not, I do have to remount these pieces. For me, just as an example here, most of these bowls that I'm using in the demo and stuff were turned during a wood turning class, that beginning wood turning class where I have to show them how to sand the piece, put the first coat of finish on, turn the bottom. Sometimes they're half turned and all that stuff. So I remount them. And when Bob England says we need bowls for the Empty Bowls project, I have about 10 usually that I'm finishing up. So that's where these all end up.
Charlie, what do you use for glue? A CA glue?
Yeah, I just use regular, no, I use just regular yellow glue. You could use a CA glue if you're in a hurry or something. But no, as a matter of fact, if you're just going to do a light sanding and a refinish, hot melt glue works great. And that peels right off. I'll have to turn this. But one point I wanted to make, the thicker the piece of wood you use for your waste block, and this, even if you're mounting a bowl to turn, a blank to turn, and you put a waste block on it, I like to use a thick one. In this particular case, it took me 2 tries to get that just right. So if you got a thick piece, you just turn it off flat, of course, and go again. And you can do that several times. The waste blocks on my bowls, a normal bowl like this one, I'll take a parting tool and cut in there as far as I dare, and then remove this, but I'll use this 2 or 3 or 4 times. And, you know, it's something I've said before, but I'm a big believer in using a waste block, and one of the main things that it does for me is gets the work, the bowl, away from the headstock. You know, I really feel sorry when I'm teaching my first level classes. You know, you do stuff that you know is very, very difficult to do. So I've got them using double-faced tape, which puts the bowl way back here. And they're in there trying to get in the bottom of the bowl. And I'm saying, you know, there is a better way, but, you know, we need more time to get ready for it. So, but anyway, that's that. Okay, so that talks about how we could remount one of these bowls here. And again, talking about the finish. And I was going back to this whole notion about starting out the finishing process. How are you going to actually finish this? And as I said, you know, when I turn a bowl, be it a small bowl like this or a very big salad bowl, one of the things that I want to consider is being able to take it off the lathe and not tie up the chucks or anything else, so I usually put it in a 4-jaw chuck or whatever. But in any case, no matter how I hold it, whether it's in a 4-jaw chuck with a 10 in there or whatever, in most instances my goal would usually be such that I can put a finish on the whole outside of the bowl and the foot, and my preference is to be able to go over the corner onto what's going to be the flat foot. That way there, I'm going to do, because I'm going to do all the coats of finish, the final finish, waxing, everything. The bowl is going to be done except for that bottom section. Then if I have to turn that off and turn the bottom here, well, when I go to finish the bottom, I've got a natural stopping place to be able to delineate between the finished piece and the newly piece. But going one step further, to kind of reiterate what I'm talking about, considering how are you going to finish a project. This is this year's Christmas ornament. If you've been around here, you know that every year I try to make a different ornament for a bunch of family members and a few other people. And I'm getting down there on these ideas. But this year, here it is. You're the first to see it. Other than my biggest critic, who is my wife. And she approves, so I guess I'm in the process right now of making them. But let's get back to, we're going to make this ornament. How are we going to finish it? Okay? So, one might think that you would hang it and spray it. You're going to sand between coats, right? How the hell are you going to do that? I don't think so. So just to illustrate the point, the ball, the sphere, will be 100% finished. Dyed, sprayed with lacquer, sanded between coats, sprayed with the final coats of lacquer, waxed, and then powdered off the layer. The finials are turned in the 4-jaw chuck. They've got a tenon, which is going to go up into the hole. I have two different holes for this. One is 9/16, and the other one is something. 0.46 is just one that I found. But this will be sprayed, put back in the chuck, spun, I'll sand it down, and I'll go through the same things I did with that, and this is the top finial here. So that's kind of what I'm talking about. You know, for me anyway, it's saying, okay, how the heck am I going to finish that thing to get it, not just to finish it, but I'm kind of critical to myself about the type of finish that I have on my pieces. So I just wanted to illustrate that it falls over to all different types. Okay?
Charlie, do you ever use like crystal coat, the friction finish,
Yes, on some pieces. Right.
but not something like that?
I could, probably not the pierced piece. I'd be afraid of the stuff maybe going inside there. But yeah, on things like a salt and pepper mill or something like that, yeah. A little different process. But let's get back to the basic bowl here. The number one, any article, whatever you read, video on finishing, should say the number one process is surface preparation. Hands down. Okay? So you've got to establish for yourself how are you going to sand that into what grit. It's all over the place. You know, you can buy sandpaper that's 12,000 grit. I write on that stuff. But what's realistic? Okay, what are you trying to do? And talk to people and they say, well, you know, when I get done with my sanding process, it's got swirl marks in it. Well, it shouldn't have swirl marks. And I've often thought that we should have a demo night on sanding, because some people, for example, a lot of people use power sanding. And that's fine for you. For me, I don't. The only time I use it is on on a natural edge bowl, where I can't turn the whole thing. But every time I use power sanding, when I get the finish on there, I can see those dead blasted swirl marks on there, even if I've used 400 grit. So I'm not a power sander. Other people I know, I'll pick on Bob England because he's not here tonight. Bob sands the bejesus out of it with a power sander, and that's fine. But it would be nice to have, you know, a little maybe discussion on that and how that actually works. But basically, what it boils down to is this. You've got to sand that to a surface condition such that the scratch marks, let's face it, there are going to be scratch marks. The scratch marks that you have left in your piece are small enough such that the finish that you're going to apply is going to fill them in. It's as simple as that. And if it doesn't fill them in, and they're still there when you sand and so forth, they're going to show. But they won't show if they get filled in. So that's basically what you're going to do. Now, you know, I contend that you can get a finish, you can buff it like that, but you can get a finish like these. I'll guarantee these bowls, and I was going to talk about these oil finishes, because this bowl, 1994, I'll pass it around. It has been there and back. I have used this for umpteen years to elementary schools. Pass it around to elementary kids, you know, one kid passes it to the next kid, it falls on the ground. You know, the little boy throws it to the girl next to him because he doesn't want to touch her. This has really been around. But this had the exact same finish that we're going to talk about putting on tonight. Once you put that finish on there, bingo. It's there. But the point that I was getting about sanding, these were sanded to 220 because for years and years, I only sanded to 220. I didn't even own sandpaper finer than 220. Over the years now, I've gotten old and crotchety. Now I sand with either 360 or 400. I do have one roll of 400, but 320 or 360 is the grit that I use now. And I'll just pass that thing around, not because it's a finished fancy bowl, but that's another good reason to put your date on the bowls too. Brian, do you have a question? No. Okay. Okay. So anyway, finishing. We're going to sand it down until this bowl here has been sanded to 220. And that's where we're going to start the finishing process. I agree 100% with what Kenny said, and that is that I do not want to pollute the finish that's in my bowl here. I actually brought an old can because I didn't want to bring my new can even in here. So I've got to peel off the crud here, but it's good to go. And so I had the little finishing thing. I did a similar demonstration, very similar talk at Curtis's shop, and I don't even know how many years ago that was, but it wasn't yesterday. And my little board here and can is from that demo, okay? So I wouldn't want to use a can, like a tuna can here, I guess that's what came in this, and pour finish in it to finish this bowl, if the can were flat. So, just one day standing in the shop, I glued that board and that board on there. If I'm going to do just one bowl, then I tip it this way, because it's just going to make a little puddle down here in the corner. That's all I need for finish. I don't want to waste the finish. But I will admit that I probably only use, at best, probably half of this can. Because I'm never good at how much I put in here, but I just throw it away. Okay? But for me, we'll put a little bit of this in here. Now let's just talk about the finishes themselves. And I'm concentrating tonight primarily on putting an oil finish on, mainly because that's what I put on most of my pieces. There are certainly a lot of other types of finishes that we could use. We could use spray-on lacquer, we could use the friction polish type finish. There are lots of other different types here. But I'm going to talk about most of the finishes that are either a linseed oil or a tung oil base, and then they have metallic dryers and things in them. I use a ton of Formbies on a lot of utilitarian pieces. Just if the pieces are going to go out to sale, I would use the salad bowl finish. I once talked to a fellow who had a chemistry background, and he said there's not a whole bunch of difference between, say, a salad bowl finish, Formbies. A lot of turners are using wipe-on poly for their finish. Basically, reacts the same. One that I really like and I use, and I just got another can of it because excuse me, I ran out a few about a year ago, is this Liberon finishing oil. I don't know what the formula is, but I just like the feel of it once I put it on. But they're all used exactly the same way. If this were the solid bowl finish, it'd be exactly the same way of applying it. Now, the other thing that we need to kind of shoot ahead for is what's going to happen tomorrow when this finish is dry. One of the facts about sanding, whether you sand it to 220 or 400 or 1200, is the fact that when you put a liquid on that wood, it's going to swell up. And all those little fibers that you thought were laying down so nicely are going to say, whoop, and they're going to swell up. And then the finish is going to harden. Okay? That's going to happen. When this hardens, this bowl has one coat of finish on it. It feels like the 220 sandpaper that I sanded it with. Because it's all those little fibers that got wet, swelled up, but then the finish held them in place. So that's a fact of life with my first coat of finish. And that's what I'm going to do. The first coat of finish is going to soak into the wood. It's going to wet those surfaces. It's going to make those fibers stand up, and then it's going to hold them there. And then, second day, we're going to sand that again. We're going to sand those fibers off. Now, if you're going to stain, dye, or any of those other types of things, for example, if we want to put a dye on, and Kenny's using a lot of dyes, and I've been experimenting with using a lot of dyes. In this situation, if I put my first coat of finish on there, it's going to happen with the dye because it's a liquid. It's an alcohol base, so it's going to dry real quick, so it's not going to have time to do a whole bunch, but it will raise the grain some. But when I put my first coat of finish on there, lacquer, whatever, it's going to raise that grain, and it's going to be rough. Now, if I sand, I'm going to chance having to sand through the dye. With this type of dye, it goes in so hard, I'm not worried about seeing white, but it will lighten it up. So in that case, if you're going to color, one of the things that you can do in furniture work, we used to call it sizing, using a wash coat. Now they say sanding sealer, whatever, okay? Some product that you can put on the wood, it's going to dry real quick, but it's going to wet the surface, raise the grain, and hold it there. In furniture work, we used to take a glass of water, about that much, a couple drops of just regular woodworking glue, mix it up just enough to shade that tint, the water, wipe that on the piece of furniture. There wouldn't be enough glue in there to stop any penetration of color in the wood, but it would raise the grain and then sand the bejesus out of it. I mean, you can just put a damp cloth on a piece and wet it, and then let it dry. It will raise the grain up, but it doesn't hold the grain as well. So you want some blend, like the glue, or in this case, what I use is a diluted solution of shellac and alcohol. But the amount of shellac is, well, it's cut about 50-50, and I'm using that seal type. Just if you do this, make sure that the shellac is de-waxed. Because most shellac has wax in it, so they de-wax it, because if it's waxed, then some finishes won't stick. But a de-waxed shellac, cut it 50-50, just put that on there, let it dry for about 20 minutes, half hour, sand it, because it'll be totally dry, then you can apply the dye, or stain, better. Okay? But for a bowl, it's going to be just an oil finish. Again, we're going to wipe that coat on. Now, I'm going to use just a piece of cloth to apply that finish. And I am actually anal about this. I'm going to go through the process just to show you. Take a little 2-inch square piece. I folded that blasted thing in half that size, and then I take it and fold these two ends in so it leaves a point out. I don't know how if somebody told me this or I actually ended up doing it, but it makes a pad for applying that gets down into crevices real nice, yet it leaves you a nice area to apply the finish. Now, a lot of people, and there are some people who would use a foam brush to do this, and that's okay. I'll throw this rag away. I certainly don't want to clean out the foam brush, and I don't, even though it's only 39 cents, you know how many pieces you make, so it would add up. But if you take and wet that applicator and apply it, it's going to put plenty of finish on. And just remember, the bigger the rag, the more finish it's going to soak up. So that's the other reason you want a small rag. You don't want some great big, when I get chuckling sometimes because teaching the beginning wood turning class, I'm helping somebody with their turning and somebody's over here finishing and they got like a bath towel. You're dipping it in there and say, there's no more left in the can, But anyway, the one area that I find problematic is the very center. Same thing that bugs you all the time you're turning. You got that area where it's not turning, and so I really concentrate on turning, getting a round amount in that center there. Just an aside, I wouldn't give you 10 cents for a lathe that didn't have a hand wheel. You got to have a hand wheel so that you can apply your finishes here. And so I apply the finish this way. Let's see. Look at this high tech area. Did you see that? There. Now you can see what I'm doing, can't you?
Yep.
Maybe. I'm going to put that in there, and I'm going to work my way right to the outside of the bowl here.
Charlie, I thought you told us once you used shop towel for your applicator.
Okay.
Did you?
I lied. No. I actually brought it. I was reading a bunch of articles by finishing people, particularly, I get that English magazine, Wood Turning, and they're all about, the English are all about shop towels. And what they mean by shop towels are these right here. And I was using them. And the reason was that these are not they're not gonna have the lint on them that a cloth does. But what I do is, and I was actually gonna do that, we might as well talk about that now. In this particular process, I'm more interested in getting a finish on there, and I know that I'm gonna sand the bejesus out of this thing tomorrow. And so, the fact that it's a lint, I will use that for the last couple coats though. Good thing to say that. Okay,
Why don't you do, apply the finish with the lathe actually motorized? Let it turn itself.
I have seen people's lathes that do that, and their face shields. I can actually see what I'm doing, particularly with this first coat. I think you get a drying, unless you put a lot on there, and then you've exacerbated the problem of doing it. I want to really get up close and personal, but you could. I mean, I don't know anybody that does. Maybe you do.
I do.
Works okay.
Yeah,
Yeah, so that's fine.
doesn't make a mess.
And that's why I say, you know, if you do something and it works, just keep doing it. Okay, well, we're just going to put this coat on here. And this is soaking in your finish. You're going to find that just like the problem that you had when you sanded it, where your end grain didn't sand for poop, it's going to suck in the most finish. So just in doing that, my end grain here is dry again. So you can spend, as far as I'm concerned, you can spend as much time as you want to trying to get this first coat applied. But in particular, I would just take the extra second and go back over the end grain a little bit. Just don't get runs. Don't put so much on that you're going to get runs here. And I'm going to just hit this inside here one more time on the end grain. Basically, that's it. And I am all out of juice, so I guess I did pretty well. Okay. But then it's put it off to the side. And again, I've got a handle. In this case, it's the waste block. And in most cases, when I turn it over, it is the waste block. Now, let's talk about, tomorrow. And that is, this bowl here has one coat of finish on it. Again, it's a remount, one that I turned here in one of the classes. And a lot of people are worried. Well, if I sand this too much, I might take the finish off. Well, put that notion right aside. That should never even enter into the equation. And by the way, what I do is I usually have a piece of regular paper towel or whatever. You just wipe this rag out and it's good to go the next time. So, been using that one for a long time. But now what we're going to do, whoops. Oh, I wanted to go down there. But in this sanding process here, we want to just make sure that we sand this thing totally, not worrying at all about going through the finish. And if we have any irregularities, things that we don't like, for example, after the first or definitely the second coat, if you didn't do a good job with the bump, that's when you're going to see it. So, go back and fix it. Take a gouge and flatten that one off. There's actually a bump on that one there, but I'm so thin on the bottom when I was messing with it that I said, that's okay, just let it go. But now it's sanding, wiping it clean. Now that's the other thing that I just wanted to touch base with that I don't get hung up on. A lot of people think that the finishing room and the finishing area has to be spotless, clean. You saw the pictures of my shop, and I finished right on that lathe right there. There is dust everywhere. But because of the process that I'm using, whereby whenever I put a coat of finish on, even the last coat, if there's a little bit of dust or something, and you know, I'm not talking about, you know, pea-sized pieces, but if there's a little bit of dust and so forth, I'm going to be finishing that anyway, so I'm not worried about it. I really don't get hung up on it. What I do is I apply the finish, and then the drying area is in, actually it's in my cellar, so I put them in there, so they aren't in the shop drying, I will say that now. But I don't really get hung up too much on that process. And so, when we get this done, I'm just going to quickly just do a little bit faster than that, I guess. But you can see this is a remounted bowl, and it's running pretty darn true. Certainly good enough to do the sanding process. And if you've done a good job with the first part of the sanding process, this part should go really fast. But again, I can't emphasize enough, don't be afraid to just keep going on that and get that sanded down.
You use the final grit that you ended up with on your initial sanding?
Yes, but always used. I don't use, I keep the used sandpaper. I find that it's not as sharp as it is when I use it to the wood. So I have a whole bunch of paper that's used